So climate manipulations at this site have been running for over 25 years, and during that time we've monitored how the plant community has responded to the climate treatments. One of the surprising things that has shown us is that this grassland is resistant to the effects of simulated climate change. That's surprising because in other experiments that have been comparable to this, we usually observe some significant shift in the plant community. So those other sites have suffered the impacts of climate change, if you like. Here, there's some ability of the grassland to resist that simulated climate change. We think one of the reasons for this is that plants can choose microhabitats or niches, if you like, within each of the grassland plots that enables each of the species to survive at some location within the plots, therefore protecting biodiversity overall. But that's not the end of the story. We're also now documenting how the plant populations are evolving and adapting in response to those climate treatments. So the long duration of those climate treatments has actually driven a process of evolution within some of the species. And that has changed their characteristics or traits in a way that allows those populations to persist better under those climate treatments. Our investigations also are not stopping with the plants. We are just beginning to investigate how the soil microbial community below ground is responding to the effects of climate change. This microbial community is hugely important. It supports the plants above ground and dictates the way that nutrients are cycled, how ecosystem processes work within this grassland. So for the soil microbes, we're looking at bacteria and fungi predominantly. We're trying to understand how those communities of microorganisms have changed in response to climate change using molecular tools. We're also investigating particular taxa, particular bacterial taxa, and asking whether those have evolved in response to climate change. So what we hope in the future is to be able to understand how all these processes will contribute to the resistance of a single ecological community to climate change. How is this surprising resistance ability that we see here at Buxton maintained? What roles does species sorting within the plots, do evolution and other adaptive processes actually have to support this incredible grassland ecosystem? These communities are extremely important for biodiversity. Calcareous grasslands that are species rich have a high conservation value. We've lost the majority of such grasslands over the last 100 years. We've had up to 90% losses of this habitat type, and this habitat is extremely important for supporting species that are rare and of conservation concern. Therefore, by monitoring the effects of experimental climate change at this site, we hope to be able to advise how natural protected areas that contain this grassland could be managed better into the future, and therefore provide an improved basis for conserving biodiversity. By imposing this experiment on a natural ecosystem, we can also draw conclusions about how vital ecosystem goods and services might be affected. For instance, we can understand how the biomass productivity of this grassland has been altered. We could even think about looking at how the important community of insect pollinators has been impacted by the effects of climate change on the plants themselves. We might also find an impact in the genetic changes that are happening within each of the plant populations. Here we're using next generation sequencing approaches to dissect the genetic response to climate change within each of those plant species. And we want to understand which genes those plants are using. So we're taking a marvellous natural ecosystem stuffed with plant biodiversity, stuffed with genetic biodiversity, facing it with the problem of climate change. We can then ask the question, how does that system solve the problem of climate change? How is its resistance based? What genes are being used by plants naturally to combat climate change? And that might give us a way of improving crops, perhaps breeding genes into particular crop cultivars that improves their resistance to climate change and supports food security and agricultural productivity.